and today I would like to talk about the market value of solar and the role of air conditioners. So what motivates my research? Future with iShares of solar is inevitable, and this is based on modeling evidence. If we really want to limit global warming to the targets set in the Paris Agreement. And if you have a lot of solar in the system, or if you start increasing the share of solar in your system, what happens is its economic value starts decreasing. And this is mainly due to the mismatch between solar and solar generation and demand. Well, when we talk about electricity markets, electricity market basically does two things. First, it makes sure that the demand matches the supply. And the second thing is that it makes sure that there are some long-term investment signals so that investors come into the market and invest. And so if we look at the systems with iShares of solar, and in the meantime we see a decline in economic value, or by that I mean the revenues that they make from the electricity market, and if it starts decreasing and they're uncertain whether they would recover their investment costs, then I think it creates an uncertainty in investment. And so trying to understand how the economic value declines in a highly solar system in India and what can be done about it is really crucial. So in the meantime, I talked about the solar growth in the supply side, but in the meantime, the modeling evidence and also empirical data suggests that there will be a larger scale deployment of air conditioners on the demand side. And this would be really driven by the economic growth and also global warming. So as more and more households get richer, they will definitely buy an air conditioner. And so we have these two transformations on the supply side and the demand side. And it's really good to look at the synergies between these two transformations. And as I said, if you have more and more air conditioners in the system, of course, there will be a need for the peaking capacity. So, but the good news is that air conditioning load is a very flexible load due to its thermal characteristics, and it could be exploited as a demand response source to help solar. So the decline in the economic value of solar PV electricity. So I define it as the solar market value is defined as the sum of the revenues that the solar plant makes over the year. So it's the sum of the price, the wholesale electricity price times the solar generation divided by the overall generation. So that's what I mean by the wholesale value of solar. And as you can see, as we increase the share of solar, its market value starts decreasing. And if we assume a fixed LCOE, or levelized cost of electricity for solar, and our optimal solar share is at the point where these two values meet. So, but if the society wants to meet its climate targets and they want to achieve higher shares of solar, then we really want to make sure that solar is competitive at very high shares. So if we want to go to a new optimal solar share, what do we do? I mean, so far solar is really policy driven, and the societies, they subsidize, like Germany is subsidized, but we could also make the system friendlier so that the market takes care of it. So if we want to achieve our new optimal share, what do? We can increase the market value of solar. That means the investors would make more money in the market by selling their solar electricity. And in this way, you can achieve higher shares of solar. That means there will be good signals to invest in solar. And I look at the role of air conditioners for this research on this transition to higher shares of solar through increasing its market value. So demand side with air conditioning, demand side from air conditioners with cool thermal storage. I mean, traditionally, demand side from air conditioners really exploited for direct load curtailment, but the future of demand response would be to couple it with energy storage. So energy storage with demand response is one of the very promising options. And in our model, we examine two different DSM measures with air conditioners. So our technologies, I'll come to them later, but we look at the maximum demand-side management durations, the efficiencies, and also the cost of these technologies are included in our model. So I look at two different technologies. One is mechanical pre-cooling of building thermal mass. So here you just buy a programmable thermostat. So this technology or this scenario assumes that all Indian households, they just put a programmable thermostat of less than $200 and you pre-cool your houses. That means during the day when there's a lot of solar energy, you pre-cool it and then you let the thermal building, the mass, take care of it. So you don't have to come home at around 6 p.m. and then turn on your AC and then cool your house. And the second one is cool thermal energy storage. Another technology is the chilled water storage that we like to look at. So it's just cooling the water and then let the compressors turn off when the air conditioning is needed. And so what we're saying is that you cool your buildings when there's abundant solar energy, and so that there's no pressure in the evening when there's no solar energy. So some of our main assumptions on our DSM technologies. So we have, as I said, two different technologies. Their investment costs here for 2040, it's hard to get really reliable costs on these technologies of how much does a chilled water storage tank cost or how much does a programmed thermostat cost. But what we would like to do is to make some reasonable assumptions to show that there's one option of a very low cost option and then there's a high cost option. And the differences are that with the low cost option with pre-cooling with thermal mass, you don't have a lot of flexibility to decide when to start reducing your load, but it's a low cost option. But with chilled water storage, you really have the flexibility to decide when to turn off your air conditioning compressor, but it comes with a higher cost. So we just want to differentiate between these two options. And we include an efficiency here, 70% and 90% chilled water storage. And the maximum installed capacity is 350 gigawatts. And I come to this, how we reached to this conclusion. And with the pre-cooling, 4 hours, and with chilled water storage, 8 hours of demand-side management, as I said, because it's pretty flexible. So I use a DETR model. It's an investment and economic dispatch model. And so DETR is an open source power sector model developed by DIW in Berlin. And it basically minimizes the total system cost, so both the investment and operating costs at all times. It's an hourly model. And we also capture inflexibility of the power system by putting a cost on the load increase and decrease of the conventional power plants. And it's assumed to be a partial equilibrium model of the wholesale electricity market. So we modeled the wholesale electricity market in DETR, and it's basically the ratio of the change in the total cost to the change in demand. So this is how we define the wholesale electricity price. It's just the additional cost of generating 1 unit of electricity. So in other words, it's really, we're modeling an electricity-only market with energy-only market with a scarcity pricing. And I'm really not sure whether the Indian system in 2040 would stay only an energy-only market with scarcity pricing, or there would be some other mechanisms of capacity mechanisms or so. But right now, we only assume an energy-only market. With the scarcity pricing, for people who are not aware of this, it's just the model for 1 hour of the year. The price goes to like $40,000 per megawatt hour, so that the capacities, let's say the gas power plants, really cover their investment costs. Because in an energy-only market, you have to cover your costs by just selling the electricity. So the demand side, what do we assume for the demand in 2040? So we have two different scenarios of demand. One is, so as you can see, the total load is about 3,535 terawatt hours. That's the total load. And in one scenario, it's a simple scaling scenario where we take the current load and we scale it to the total load that we have here. And the total load comes from our modeling team. And in the other scenario, we look at the impact of AC growth on the total load profile. And unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time to discuss on this because this is in our other paper that's currently being written on. We looked at the impact of AC growth on the total load. So we actually disaggregate the total load into AC load and non-AC load, and then we scale each one to match their growth. And we can see how AC really impacts the total load in 2040. And from now on, I look at the impact of demand response on this AC scenario, where we actually captured the impact of AC growth. And as you can see on the graph, with a growth of 800 terawatt hours of AC, you can see how the system will be impacted. So the load factor will decrease because of the AC growth. You have a peak, so from 84% in 2010 to around 67%. So the load factor in any power system will decrease, and the peak load will grow from 482 gigawatts to 606 gigawatts. This is 2040 peak loads, and you can see the difference due to the air conditioning. And so the peak coincident AC load will be 350 gigawatts. And also a growth in AC will really change the seasonality of the peak load. As we can see, in 2010, I observed that the peak load was in October, around 8 p.m. But 2040, if you include AC growth, the peak load will go to May at about 5 p.m. This will be the whole India peak load. So it's a major transformation. And so this was our demand side assumptions. On the supply side, we really look at an optimized expansion. So we call it a quasi-greenfield. I assume a CO2 price of $50 per ton. And in this study, we assume that there's some kind of climate protection in place by 2040 in India, hopefully. So we assume, and also wind meets an 11% of total load, so it's an exogenous assumption on wind. And we also assume a relative coal phase out. So we assume that only 150 gigawatts of coal is in the system. And this is different compared to this new IEA's view in the NPS scenario where they assume like a 400 gigawatt of coal. So compared to this assumption of IEA, our assumption is relative, it shows a relative coal phase out. And no more than 50 gigawatts of coal can be built. So these are some of our rough assumptions. So it's a pretty climate-friendly assumption for 2050. And some of our results, as you can see, the wholesale value of solar declines. So at 1%, you have, so it's about $90 per megawatt hour. So 1 unit of solar electricity. And as you can see, the rapid decline by 60% solar. And with 60% solar, let me tell you the gigawatts, because what I do is I don't look at a given installed capacity. I scan my solar values over different solar shares. So 10% solar share, if I say 10% solar, it's about 176 gigawatt of solar installed capacity. By 50%, we go to 884 gigawatts of solar capacity. So just to keep in mind, and let's say by 20%, 353 gigawatts of solar. So if we, so as you can see, by 60% it's less than $10 per megawatt hour. And so the cost that I assume here in my model is about $35 per gigawatt hour. So that means in our current assumption in this scenario, about 30% solar is viable for the Indian power system in 2040. So with the CO2 price, with the cost assumptions for solar and coal, and also the nuclear limitations, if you assume all of this, about 30% is competitive. So India can go ahead and plan for a 30% solar share in the system. And why is that? Why do we get a decline? I mentioned a little bit earlier, but one of the reasons is really the suppression of wholesale electricity prices when there's a lot of solar energy. Because one of the problems, one of the challenges of solar is that if you increase its share, that means it's really an almost zero marginal cost power plant. So it actually kind of hurts itself, because if there's a lot of production, then the electricity prices go down at the time when there's solar energy, and what happens then? You don't make enough money. So as you can see, the wholesale electricity prices go down with increasing solar share, and also overproduction. It's just curtailment. There's some times of the year where there's not enough demand. So if we summarize the main challenges or the main reasons behind this decline in the revenues of solar, is this merit order effect, where the prices go down, and also this overproduction. And as you can see, the percent of solar, about 40% of the solar would be curtailed at 60% solar share if nothing is done. Okay. So with pre-cooling and chilled water storage, as you can see, we're increasing the market value of solar here. And as you can see, then on the y-axis, we have the wholesale value of solar, and the x-axis, we have the shares. And we go from the reference scenario to pre-cooling and chilled water storage. And if you take a $35 per megawatt hour of cost, you can see that the shares will go up to 50%. So now 50% solar is really competitive in this market. And as my friend was saying, that demand response is really a high potential and low cost solution. And we can see here is that by just putting a programmable thermostat in an Indian households and having all their conditioners pre-cool when they're solar, you can, the whole society can enjoy from this increased competitive solar capacity. And really this demand response from air conditioners, it really improves the profile of air conditioners, of the air conditioning load that the power system sees. As you can see now, it's really improved in the red one. It really matches the solar generation. And the electricity prices are improved when there's a lot of solar energy. So there's enough revenues, and curtailment is reduced with the chilled water storage, so there's no curtailment in our scenarios at the 40% solar share. And this is, as you can see, the total system cost really goes down with demand response, and you can see the optimal solar share there is going towards 50%. And it's much cheaper to run a power system if you include demand response compared to a system without demand response. And so as I said, it's the way forward, and these are very easy options to incorporate and to make the system more solar friendly. I think the society can enjoy high shares of renewables, and for the policymakers and planners, it's a good resource to have to get the demand response from the storage. To think about that, and it not only helps solar but also reduces the peak load for the system. Thank you very much.